Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to say thanks to the witnesses. Every one of you has been phenomenal in various ways. I got about pages of questions I'd like to ask, but I'd like to first state a few things and just to talk about the shameful state of anti-Semitism that's flourished in our nation's universities, including in my own backyard. After the horrific attacks on Israel by Hamas on October 7th, we have witnessed numerous universities, including some in my own state of New York, thank you to Ms. Dwar for being here, that have allowed hate-filled anti-Semitic demonstrations in support of terrorist groups like Hamas to circulate across the campus. Demonstrators outside of the Maxwell School at Syracuse University chanted, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," an anti-Semitic rallying cry long used by terrorist groups to call for the violent destruction of the state of Israel and the Jewish people, as Ms. Tishby so accurately described today from a personal viewpoint. The same was witnessed at the University of Rochester, which I surround with my sprawling district in upstate New York, with the group known as Students for Justice in Palestine, which we've discussed a lot today, hosting increasingly vitriolic and menacing demonstrations. The university has done little or nothing to condemn these hate-filled actions, and students, especially Jewish students, are rightfully fearing for their own safety. In the wake of the Hamas attack, and I want to reference Ms. Dwar here, and thank you so much for your courage to be out and be standing up early in this incident. And I don't think that we can state this enough. A professor at Cornell University, Russell Rickford, we should say his name, referred to the slaughter of Israeli civilians by Hamas as energizing and exhilarating. You've heard that from a number of members of Congress today, while speaking at a pro-Palestine protest on Cornell's campus. After these disgraceful comments, I wrote a letter to the Cornell University president demanding Professor Rickford's immediate resignation or removal, but to my knowledge, he has only been placed on leave for the university, but I consider that step one. And I am so grateful for your continued advocacy, Ms. Dwar, and your willingness to proudly talk about your own religious beliefs, and something that is, I think we need to talk about this, and I think everybody sort of touched on it, Mr. Greenblatt as well. I was part of a university board. I went to Colgate University. My dad is a graduate of Cornell Law School. My brother went to Syracuse. We've all been educated in upstate New York, which has a wonderful tradition of secondary schools. But I remember something called the Chicago Principles, about First Amendment principles, and many colleges and universities would not adopt them. It was a protocol for free speech, but there were certain exemptions in that, and some of those were incitement, defamation, threats, and others to students. But this would give students freedom to express their religious and other views, but also the protection that the First Amendment actually affords all of us to be able to speak freely, and why we revere this country. But I'm concerned that, and I know that everybody's put out all these wonderful, I know that Ms. Tishby put out 3 things that we could do: kick these hate groups off campus, evidence linking state police, FBI, how can they enjoy the warm welcome of Congress? Excellent question. We ask that ourselves every day. And also, Mr. Greenblatt, you laid out 4 things. And one of the things, number 1, was to pass legislation to implement a national strategy. Well, some of our colleagues have actually done that today. But how can we get something like the Chicago Principles and protocol in place at universities so that we do respect free speech? It's very important. I'm the mother of a Marine. There was the Westboro Baptist Church used to go and celebrate the death of our honorably serving service members. That's hate speech in a way, but it's also First Amendment protected. How do we do this in such a way that we don't incite violence, that we protect our students? What are the strategies? And I'd love to ask, if I can, kind of running out of time, if you can answer quickly, what's your first, how do we do this in like maybe a sentence or 2?
Who's the question directed to?
First, Mr. Greenblatt, because you suggested let's pass a national strategy. Would the Chicago Principles help?
They would. I mean, again, free speech, I think hate speech is the price of free speech. Things we detest, we have to be willing to hear. But there is something profoundly wrong with creating spaces in which the students have to shelter in their dorms for being fear of harassment. This isn't some game like Wordle or something like that. This is real life, and there are real consequences. Chicago Principles, forcing all schools to adopt them, would help enormously.
Thank you. I'd just say, Mr. Lehman, could you just, I know you've been working on this issue, could you give, what's your strategy for this? How can we do something?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll first point out that at Syracuse, we actually had the demonization of Jewish organizations like Hillel, like the Greek organizations, claiming that they are genocidal. This is where we are and part of the reason we're in such a rut. In terms of quickly pointing out strategy, we have a campus climate initiative. This, again, doesn't need to be that hard. If universities would hard code into their own policies that brighter line around how we protect free speech, we need it, we want it on campus, but be super clear, number one, around where that line is being breached in terms of incitement, in terms of harassment. And Title VI already gets us a good part of the way there. Is there this pervasive hostile and discriminatory environment? So let's, fund to make sure we can enforce Title VI. Let's create the bright lines. And then I think if we have that basis, let's discipline, because that's the other thing we don't see, which is university leaders actually enforce the rules that are already in place.
Thank you. I respect that. I just think the need to balance is that we feel we need to balance virulent anti-Semitism with the counter of Islamophobia. What happened on these college campuses is not Islamophobia. This is direct, virulent anti-Semitism. And as you say, full stop, Mr. Chanzer. I just want to say thank you all. You have been terrific and insightful, and I hope that everyone out there is watching in the listening audience of Congress.
Thank you for that last point. It's very important. Anti-Semitism is a problem, full stop.
Answer that quickly and we'll move on. Ms. Fishbach.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. It has, we've been here a little while, and you have been more than gracious to answer questions, and so I am not going to take too much time. But I will tell you, we're committed to helping. As a college student, there is nothing you should not be having to deal with and face this on college campuses. Parents send their kids to college thinking they're going to be safe, and so I just, my heart goes out to you and to your family. And I think the most striking thing that you said was when you talked about my family's life savings is going to that college. And so please understand we will do what we can to help. And so that was, and Ms. Tenney kind of touched on it. And so I kind of wanted to just maybe open it up. And I know that Ms. Greenblatt wanted to, but what is one thing, maybe, since we're late and I don't want to keep you any longer than you have to, but the one thing that we can do, and Mr. Lehman, you mentioned some, but Mr. Greenblatt, you wanted to add to that, I thought, when you were cut off.
Well, look, I think anti-Semitism needs to be called out full stop. Just like we call out racism and don't say, and you also need to tackle such and such. Yes, there are lots of problems, but we are here to talk about anti-Semitism, and let's stay focused on the problem. So what's one thing to do? Stop the flow of dark charity, like Dr. Chanzer talked about.
And Ms. Tishby.
There's another thing that all college campuses should do, and that is adopt IRA.
Here, here.
We have an International Holocaust Alliance, Remembrance Alliance. We have the working definition of what anti-Semitism is, because a lot of people don't actually know what it means. They don't know what anti-Semitism is. They don't understand that it's not just racism. It's not just looking down at someone. It's also conspiratorially looking up at someone. So if you say the Jews control the money, the Jews control the power, the Jews control the media, that's anti-Semitic, and that's not a compliment. When the Jewish community hears that, we get freaked out, because we know what's coming right after that. We've heard this for generations. Adopt IRA. Every college should adopt IRA. We're going to have a much easier time identifying anti-Semitism and fighting against it.
Well, thank you very much. And anybody else have anything they want to add? I know you're tired. I know.
We can do this for hours.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate the energy, Mr. Lehman.
Yeah, if I might, I mean, again, we'll go back to Title VI enforcement, because I have spoken to enough university leaders to know that, accountability matters. And a lot of people have spoken about taking away federal funds. That is the consequence of Title VI violations. So I would go back to that. And I would also say something that we've got to get to on the other side of this, which is education, promoting dialogue across difference. It's not something Congress can enforce, but what you can do is deal with taking the hate away from these focused, funded groups that are poisoning campus. Once we remove that, we actually create the space for students to start learning from one another, understanding one another, and that is what we need ultimately to get to where we have the healthy environment we're all looking for.
And Doctor, you had something to add?
Yeah, look, what I would say here is we need to focus on the organizations that embrace the ideology of Hamas. Hamas is a litmus test. If you are an American that if you're embracing the ideology of Hamas, the actions of Hamas, if you're lionizing the leaders of Hamas, you are anti-Semitic. This is an organization that is dedicated to the destruction of the Jewish state and nothing else. And we see far too many organizations out there talking about Hamas as freedom fighters or how they're some kind of legitimate organization operating in Gaza. None of the above. They are a violent terrorist organization that is dedicated to the destruction of the only Jewish state on the map.
If I may, one other quick thing that I don't think has been said enough here, which is Congress has shown enormous leadership, as has this administration, in supporting the legitimate right of Israel to defend itself, in continuing to show a moral compass in terms of condemning Hamas for its atrocious and unbelievable acts of terrorism. And that leadership is important to balance what is unfortunately not being said by too many university leaders, and literally the opposite that they are sometimes hearing in classrooms. So I applaud all of you for what you're doing in that regard.
And I will wrap up by just saying again, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being so strong. And God bless. And with that, I yield back.
Ms. Van Dyne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses. I know you've already been here for hours, but for taking the time to be here with us today. And it's a shame that we actually have to hold a hearing on this topic at all. Condemning anti-Semitism and the acts of evil committed by Hamas, including the slaughter of women, children, and elderly, should be easy. But sadly, we've seen so many hesitant or outright refuse to do so. And worse, we have seen instances where Hamas's disgusting atrocities are cheered. And those who do so should be ashamed. Mm-hmm. You refer to them as killers. I would refer to them as savages, as barbarians, as butchers, and as animals. We should be able to say that. Mm-hmm. I'm thankful to have seen most of my colleagues stand together in our support for Israel in the face of these horrific attacks. But since Hamas began its barbaric assault on Israel on October 7th, we have seen nearly a 400% rise in incidents of anti-Semitism across the U.S. compared to last year, and the majority of those have been on college campuses. And Ms. Dorr, I applaud you for being here today. As a fellow Cornellian, I graduated at a time, it was the best 4 years of my life. I loved that university. And it was a liberal university at that point. But never did I ever walk on that quad and not feel safe. I'm embarrassed what's going on that campus today. I cannot believe how much it's changed. And I think to myself, why? Why has it changed in those, I'm not even going to say how many years. You're quite a few years younger than I am. But I think what's happened? You know, they have embraced these diversity and equity and inclusion programs. That has been heralded. But what is really going on in these campuses? What is really being taught at these campuses? And why are we having students who come out and are willing to defend these barbarians, these savages, these horrific acts? How is that possible? This is what they're learning. And then you've got professors like our history professor, Russell Rickford, and you recognize this is why. Because this is what they are teaching on our college campuses today. This is exactly what they're teaching us. To hate. To be exhilarated with these savage acts. To defend people who are beheading children. This is what they're teaching our students. And at the same time, they're getting federal taxpayer dollars to do it. Why are we putting up with that? Why are we allowing that? You know, having a 501c organization and therefore you are expected to abide by these ethical standards that are supposed to promote the public good. When I'm looking at what's happening to you, Ms. Rohr, and I'm looking at what's happening to students across the country, where they're being harassed, where they're having to lock themselves in to not be harmed by other students, that's not for the public good. When I am seeing professors that are acting like that and not being immediately fired, that is not for the public good. What year are you?
I'm a junior, but I'm graduating this year.
So you're trying to get out of there as fast as you can.
Oh, yeah.
That's a shame. I mean, that is a shame that you were having to do that. Were you not as surprised as I was when they did not immediately fire Professor Russell Rickford?
Unfortunately, I wasn't really surprised. I mean, there are a lot of competing interests. We've spoken about money from Qatar. Cornell gets $1.8 billion from Qatar. We have a medical school there. There are a lot of competing interests, which I'm excited to have heard people express support to investigate. I've been very disappointed, and I really enjoyed my time at Cornell prior to the October 7th attacks and sitting in my classes realizing that my peers want my family dead.
And I can't believe I'm going to say this, but parents, for a university that I revered so much, parents, don't send your kids to colleges, to universities that are going to teach them this hate. Businesses, don't hire students that promote this kind of behavior. And alumni like me, stop sending your money to institutions that hate and are going to teach students to hate America and everything we stand for, and our partners, our advocates, our strongest allies, like Israel.
There's just one thing I want to say to that. I see, like, the school that I attended a Jewish high school. They have, like, lists, I've heard right now, of schools that you shouldn't be attending because they're, like, high anti-Semitism rates, so it's a high-risk school, so you shouldn't go. You're seeing elite schools on that list. You're seeing Cornell, you're seeing Penn, you're seeing Harvard. But what that's getting to is no Jewish students being able to go to elite universities where they get the opportunity to then go into, I mean, why do you go to an elite university? Because you want to get a good job, because you want to make good connections. Why are Jewish students not afforded that right if their tuition dollars are the same?
And I'm sorry, my time has expired, but thank you very much for being here today. Thank you for all of you. And I yield back.
Ms. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me thank the witnesses for their patience and indulgence. And I just want to say to you, Ms. Talia, don't let anybody steal your joy, girl. You enjoy your last year at Cornell, your parents' money that paid for that education, and it sounds to me like you are a very intelligent, learned person, and you can teach somebody something and be an example. And I do think that we do have laws. I am going to make inquiries about how Title VI, what the enforcement mechanisms are for that. But I do have a question, and perhaps it's not for you, Talia. Perhaps it's for Dr. Schanzer. These demonstrations, these anti-Semitic demonstrations on campuses, are they largely led by student organizations or spontaneous things, or are they actually things that are supported by the university? I think that's a materially important thing to try to understand.
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. They are organized at a grassroots level by some of the groups that I mentioned today in my spoken and written testimony. What is so frustrating is that these chapters, specifically we're talking about Students for Justice in Palestine, many of them actually get student activities fees from the universities.
And that's my point. So it's not like it's sanctioned by the presidents of these universities. So that just leads me to the discussion of your work, Dr. Schanzer, with the Foundations for the Defense of Democracy. You were formerly at the Treasury Department with
yes, ma'am.
With OFAC.
Yeah.
You know, this is very frightening to think that we have to rely on you to identify terrorist organizations as opposed to the Treasury Department. How big is the footprint of OFAC, particularly as some has described about our movement away from the war on terror? How many employees or how many people in the Treasury Department are on this so that something innocuous like the Holy Land Foundation or Kind Hearts for Charitable Development. I mean, it doesn't sound mean to me. How far is the reach of Treasury Department into these kinds of organizations to stop them from funding these kinds of activities?
Thank you for this question. It's really important that you ask it, and I'll try to be brief here. In the 2000s, when I worked there, we did tackle some of the domestic groups that were operating here in the United States, like Holy Land, Kind Hearts, et cetera. By the end of that decade, we stopped doing that through the Treasury. It became the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice and the FBI to look at entities that were operating inside this country. It wasn't just good enough to freeze assets, and it was actually even a bit complicated.
Let me stop because the chairman's going to cut me off. So we had a big funding of IRS agents. This is one of the things that they could be trying to analyze, but you say it's no longer the jurisdiction?
Not in the Terror Finance Department. IRS, I think it could be quite helpful.
If we had, Mr. Chairman, we need the money. I just want to say before my time has run out that I am the product of people protesting and dissenting and exercising their First Amendment rights. The college and university I went to, it was white German kids and white Irish Catholics that protested on Marquette's campus along with the black football players to try to get somebody like me an opportunity to go to college. And they gathered at St. John's church on campus. They had bread and water feasts. Their parents were terrified because their kids were going hungry, and they wouldn't eat anything but bread and water until the university responded to the need to have somebody other than black basketball players. And it was during the Al McGuire days when, black athletes were at a premium at Marquette and only white kids. And so I just want to say, I really think it's important for us to draw a line. And that's why I asked the question that I asked, so that schools are not just summarily punished for free speech. There are uncomfortable conversations, Mr. Greenblatt. If I were to sit here right now and call out some racist stuff that I see that happens every day in Congress, they'd be out there censuring me on the floor. And all I'm asking for is just to tell me today you're going to censure me so I can have my hair done and the outfit that I want to wear. Because we have, so I'm not trying to be, funny here. I'm just trying to say that I think it's extremely important that we preserve people's right to petition their government, but at the same time, every student everywhere ought to have the right to learn without being intimidated and without being harmed. And that is the promise of America, that you can learn and earn and do it. Girlfriend, do it and hold your head high. You tell them that Gwen Moore told you to do it. I yield back.